Hey there, nation lovers! Welcome to Crash Course International Relations, where we dissect the wild world of global politics. Ever wondered why countries sometimes act like frenemies? That's what IR is all about, understanding how states interact on the world stage. It affects all of us. From trade deals to international conflicts, IR shapes our daily lives. It's about ideas, beliefs, and power dynamics. So buckle up, because we're about to embark on a journey through the fascinating world of classical IR. Picture this. It's the early 20th century. The world is still reeling from the devastation of World War I. People are asking, how could this happen? How can we prevent another catastrophe? Enter the classical approach to IR. It emerged from the ashes of war, seeking to understand the root causes of conflict and pave the way for a more peaceful world. Thinkers like Thucydides, Machiavelli, and Hobbes laid the groundwork for classical IR. They observed that states, like people, are driven by self-interest and the pursuit of power. They argued that conflict is inherent in the international system, where there's no world government to enforce rules. Classical IR wasn't all doom and gloom, though. It also emphasized diplomacy, alliances, and a balance of power as ways to manage conflict and maintain order. It's like a delicate dance between cooperation and competition. So, classical IR emerged during a time of crisis, offering a sobering yet pragmatic perspective on international politics. It acknowledged the realities of power and the ever-present potential for conflict. Let's talk about realism, one of the cornerstones of classical IR. Imagine the international system as a jungle. States are like animals, constantly vying for survival and dominance. That's the essence of realism. Realists believe that states are the main actors in IR, and that they act rationally to maximize their power. They view power as the key to security and influence. Think military strength, economic clout, and diplomatic leverage. Realists argue that states can't rely on international organizations or international law to protect them. It's a self-help system, where states must be prepared to defend themselves. They believe that moral considerations should take a backseat to national interests. Now, realism doesn't mean states are always at war. It just means they're always looking out for number one. They engage in alliances, diplomacy, and even cooperation when it serves their interests. But they never forget that power is the name of the game. Now let's switch gears and explore idealism, the other major school of thought in classical IR. If realism is the cynical realist, idealism is the hopeful optimist. It believes in the power of cooperation, international law, and organizations to create a more peaceful and just world. Idealists argue that states aren't just self-interested actors. They're also capable of moral behavior and working together for the common good. They believe that international institutions like the United Nations can help resolve disputes peacefully and promote cooperation. Idealism emphasizes diplomacy, international law, and human rights as tools for building a better world. It promotes free trade, democracy, and respect for international norms. Think of it as the kumbaya approach to IR, where cooperation and shared values are key. Of course, idealism has its critics. Realists argue that it's naive to believe that states will always act in the best interests of humanity. They point to the many conflicts and human rights abuses that continue to plague the world. Section 5, Hans Morgenthau, the realist giant. Let's meet one of the heavyweights of classical realism, Hans Morgenthau. Imagine him as the stern professor of international relations, lecturing on the importance of power and national interest. Morgenthau argued that human nature is inherently selfish and that this egoism drives international politics. He believed that states are motivated by a lust for power, which he called animus dominandi. He outlined 6 principles of political realism, emphasizing that states should act rationally to advance their interests. He believed that morality should be subordinate to national security and that power is the ultimate arbiter in international relations. Morgenthau's ideas were hugely influential, especially during the Cold War. His writings shaped the foreign policies of many countries, including the United States. He remains a towering figure in international relations, even though his work has been both praised and criticized. Carr challenging utopian dreams. Now, let's introduce another influential thinker, E.H. Carr. He was a British historian and diplomat who challenged the idealistic assumptions that were prevalent in the interwar period. Carr argued that idealism was often used by powerful states to mask their own self-interests. He believed that international organizations and law were tools of the strong, used to maintain their dominance. He criticized the idea of a harmony of interests between states, arguing that conflict was inevitable in a world of unequal power. He believed that states should be guided by realism and a clear-eyed understanding of their own interests. Carr's book, The 20 Years' Crisis, is considered a classic of classical international relations. It's a sobering critique of utopian thinking and a call for a more realistic approach to international politics. Section 7, Classical versus Modern IR, a Meeting of Minds. Now, let's fast forward to the present. How do classical approaches to IR stack up against modern theories? It's like comparing classic rock to today's pop music. Both have their merits and appeal to different tastes. Modern IR encompasses a wider range of theories, including liberalism, constructivism, and feminism. These theories challenge some of the core assumptions of classical IR, such as the centrality of the state and the inevitability of conflict. For example, liberalism emphasizes the role of international institutions and economic interdependence in promoting cooperation. Constructivism highlights the importance of ideas, norms, and identities in shaping state behavior. Feminism brings attention to the gendered nature of IR and the experiences of women. Despite their differences, classical and modern IR aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they can complement and enrich each other. Modern theories can build upon the insights of classical thinkers, while classical approaches can provide a historical and philosophical foundation for understanding contemporary issues. Section 8. The enduring relevance of classical IR. You might be wondering, why should we care about these old-school ideas? Well, classical IR is more than just history. Its insights remain surprisingly relevant in today's world. The international system is still characterized by anarchy, the absence of a world government. States still compete for power and influence, even in our increasingly interconnected world. And the threat of conflict, while perhaps less imminent than during the Cold War, still looms large. Classical IR provides a timeless framework for understanding these enduring realities. It reminds us that power matters, that states act in their own interests, and that conflict is always a possibility. It also highlights the importance of diplomacy, alliances, and a balance of power in managing international relations. Section 9. Case Study. The classical lens on the Cold War. Let's put on our classical IR glasses and analyze the Cold War. This rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union defined the 20th century. Classical realism explains the origins and dynamics of the Cold War. Both superpowers aimed to maximize their power and influence. They engaged in a global struggle for dominance, building militaries and forging alliances. The Cold War illustrates the balance of power concept. Neither superpower wanted a direct confrontation, risking nuclear war. Instead, they engaged in proxy wars, espionage, and a nuclear arms race. The Cold War ended peacefully, but reminds us of classical IR's relevance. Lessons from this era inform our understanding of international politics today. Section 10. Conclusion: the timeless wisdom of classical IR. So there you have it, a crash course in classical IR. We've explored its origins, key thinkers, and enduring relevance in today's world. It's like a trusty compass, guiding us through the complex and often turbulent waters of international politics. Classical IR reminds us that the world is a competitive place, where states jostle for power and influence. It teaches us to be wary of utopian schemes and to ground our understanding of IR in a realistic assessment of power dynamics. But classical IR isn't just about doom and gloom. It also highlights the importance of diplomacy, alliances, and a balance of power in managing conflict and maintaining order. It reminds us that even in a world of anarchy, cooperation is possible. So, the next time you're trying to make sense of a global conflict, a trade war, or a diplomatic spat, remember the lessons of classical IR. It might just provide the clarity and insight you need to navigate the ever-changing landscape of international relations.